If you're part of the meetup groups locally, there's a WordPress meetup that I am a co-organizer of, and so you may have met me there, or you're invited. And it's easy to find. If you do WordPress, then it's right there in the dashboard, the links to local events. And if you want to find it on meetup.com, that's easy to do as well. I'm a faculty member in the iSchool, and have also been involved with informatics, which used to be a separate institute. Now it's in the iSchool. That's kind of my path to come in. So that's with the Fab Lab and maker spaces and outreach to the community. And that's still kind of what I do. I started piloting a new course and a new initiative within the iSchool, which is looking at studio-based learning. So we already developed a game development studio, and then game studies students participate in that, and they actually build games for clients. Some of them have pretty big grant, so the students get paid, and the grad students learn to manage projects. That was the inspiration. And they got asked if they also build websites. They said, actually, that's a little bit outside of our focus. And so we started another studio, and we have a course that's based in that. And then I'm going to dovetail all my courses basically into somehow, we're inventing it as we go, this kind of practical hands-on studio environment. So students can do projects in courses, but they don't do coherent projects with a coherent team of teams. And that experience is what we're going for. Judith will talk a little more about the studio-based learning concept. We're actually taking it international through our Playful by Design group on campus and in the community. Let's see. So what I'm going to do here, what we're going to do is basically have a kind of almost like a podcast format of a dialogue between Judith, who will propose some features of the design process for game development, and basically say, what have you got in web design? And we'll go through a couple dozen fairly quickly provocative slides that she'll say, here's what we've got, and I'll say, well, here's kind of what we have. What do you think?
So let me
Yeah.
jump in here and introduce myself.
Yeah.
Prior to getting that going here. So like David, I am a faculty member at the iSchool, and I also got into the iSchool via informatics. I was actually appointed to the Slavic department when I began teaching game design for informatics, and was eventually, my involvement that increased to the point that I applied for a job in the iSchool and got it, and I've been 5 years now in the iSchool. One of the things I did was I was part of a group of people who created the Game Studies and Design program, which is an informatics program, and I'm the faculty director for this program. But it's really the history and background of that program, which is what we think might be interesting to you, because it arose from sort of a complicated campus design community, you could say. Around the mid-2010s, a group of us who were wondering why there was no game studies program on our campus started to kind of take a census of that design community. Who was here doing game-related work? And what we discovered was a pretty complex community of people doing game relevant work, which was not necessarily directly involved with game design, but there were faculty members researching on games. There were faculty members using games as part of their research. There were courses that involved games, and some, like game theory in political science, et cetera, have been going on for a very long time. And some more recent courses, like in CS on Unity, the program for creating games, but then people doing all kinds of game adjacent kind of work, and like makerspaces. makerspaces who were teaching camps in which some game design was happening, but other also activities which are not precisely game design, but are relevant and connected. So it was a very complicated community. Oh, and we discovered partnerships in the community. So not only were there game stores, game conventions, we discovered the Champaign-Urbana Design Organization had a board game competition, and it had for years, Kudo Plays. And they quickly became sort of a member of this community. And it wasn't just faculty, it was faculty, it was students, and it was staff from all over campus, administrative staff, IT staff, and CITL as a whole, which was starting to look at playful pedagogies, reaching out to game studios. So when we started talking, it was just this tremendous whirling amount of energy, but no real focus for that energy. So we started offering a yearly symposium where we started to sort of show off, like, who are we? What do we do? Here's a bunch of faculty. What are they doing? Here's a bunch of IT people. What are they doing? What is CITL up to? What are the libraries up to? You know, from end to end, what's happening in the community? What's the history of gaming communities? Of the Midwest gaming communities. Like, from end to end, we did this. And what we realized is that we didn't have anything simple. We had something very complex. And our audience came from, as we tried to say, who is coming to this, who cares about this, sort of four pools of people. And we started to imagine this as a kind of interactive Venn diagram where one part of this community seemed to be related to the technology, particularly the development of new technologies, gaming platform technologies, you know, design technologies, Unity, Unreal Engine, but then virtual reality, AI, all these kinds of things, really on the technology side, which are relevant to games, but beyond games. And then there were a group of people interested in research on games, research with games, simulation-based research. You can collect data on any topic using a game. That's not really study of games, right? So all of a sudden games were becoming a research modality. What was that about? Super interesting. And then there were people interested in games for pedagogy. For 100 years in education, they've been trying to make education more engaging, and they've looked at games and playful elements. So the very long conversations coming out of education around games, but suddenly new conversations about how do we teach game design, right? So an interest in actually teaching these things. And then the other group, and this was a big group, was the design community. And the interests of the design community were very broad. I mean, sometimes it's about game design, straight up game design, but web design was in the mix, and narrative design, and every kind of design that you're all involved with were somehow coming to the table and interested in the overlaps. So we applied for an investment for growth grant from a curriculum committee that emerged from those Playful by Design symposia. And we did get an investment for growth grant. From that, we created the Game Studies and Design program, which offers undergraduate and graduate minors, which you can add on to any major. And then we applied for a second investment for growth grant to sort of broaden our scope. And from that grant, we just got through this faculty senate, an online professional masters of game development, which will be starting up. And then also, as David mentioned, this studio-based pedagogy. So he's actually running the second of these sort of experimental piloted studios. And the idea basically is to get our students, for the workforce of today, they have to show up at their interviews with a portfolio oftentimes, and they want to show that they've done something real. And not everybody can get an internship in the summer, right? I mean, there's a sort of inequality there of access to education going on. So can we provide internship-like experiences to our students while they're on campus? Can we have them doing real work, not busy work? Can we send them into the workforce with portfolios? And so I think I'll save this, maybe if you have questions at the end, since the studios are a little bit off topic from what we want to do in this hour, but they might be interesting to some of you. So really quick before we get started, David sort of prefaced for you what the format of this, less of a presentation and more of a conversation we're going to have, which you're going to witness, but we'd also like you to join in on. But before I start, I want to say what I'm not going to be doing here. So David is here representing web design and all the ancillary design work that happens in and around that community, because we know that WebCon is much broader than just web design, lots of things, content management, lots of design traditions are part of your community of practice. So, and I'm here to sort of poke you all and poke David in particular, provoke him, and just throw out there some approaches that game designers take to design. And then we're just going to look for resonances between these design traditions. Where are our commonalities? What are our differences? Can we take insights from each other in these different design traditions? We just want to stir it up a little bit. And I just want to say the thing that I'm not going to do today, just to clarify, I think it said this in the paragraph blurb about this talk, is that I'm not suggesting any gamification of the work that you do or the design that you do or the websites you make or anything else. Gamification is this idea that you can take something which is not a game and add game-like elements to it for engagement or fun or whatever reason you might have for wanting to do that. I am suggesting something way more radical, which is that many things in life can be analyzed as games already. I've written about it in terms of courses already games. They're just really bad games or unfun games. Websites, so I'm provoking you to say a website is a species of game already. And that you probably are already attending to things that game designers attend to. So I'm just asking you to look at what you already do in a slightly different way. And I'm not suggesting that you change what you do particularly, or that you add anything game-like to what you do. So that's not what the topic is about. It's something else. So with that, I think, David, why don't we just dive in?
Okay.
All right.
This will be the format, by the way. We'll just do a series, a couple dozen of these, provoke some ideas, jot your ideas in the chat if you want, so that we can circle back to them later, or questions. And then we'll try to go quick through it, and then we can come back to the interesting parts, the parts that at least to you are interesting.
Yes, so we're going to run through, as David says, I'm going to run through these slides, and then I'm going to return through the slides and have it look at things you've said in the chat. And what are we looking for in the chat? Maybe your own experiences, like, oh, I do that. Oh, I don't do that. Oh, you know, I've never thought about my thing that way, but I could, right? So we invite you to react in the chat. You can have a side conversation if you like. You can also put questions in if you want. So we're going to return to the chat rather than stopping as we go, because we just want to throw all these things out onto the table, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. So the first one, so here we go. This is a little bit of an overview slides. So the next couple of slides are going to talk about who we think of in game design as the player. So when we're going to design a game, first thing on the table is going to be who's our audience? Who is going to play this game? And then a whole slew of considerations come in that are going to guide our design document, our design plan. And the way that traditionally, the last 3 decades, about as long as there have been websites, well, exactly as long as there have been websites, there have been digital games, right? But game design is much older, but let's mostly focusing on the era of digital games. And so the first conversations about player type emerged in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And those discussions typically were about what characteristics of the player, what are their goals for playing the game, what are their motivations? And then, of course, how can we keep motivating them, right, to have them come back and play? And then as these conversations went on, they started to get a little more subtle. What are their experiential preferences? This is sensory preferences, for example, or limitations in the sense of accessibility. And then embodied preferences, what do they want to feel, right? So these would be conversations game designers would have at the outset when deciding upon our audience. David, what do you do on the web side?
Oops, sorry about that. Well, I can get started with, we look at the folks that we're building for as well. We have a whole tradition of user or customer personas that we do. And I could have kept going here, but I'm going to kind of leave that as a prompt. What's missing that might correspond to the track that Game Studies has done, trying to develop a whole typology of, there's quite a bit of work in that. And our audience is everybody in the world. Their audience is people that play games. So for us, it's a bigger task, and it's a fool's errand to try to have a typology of every user. But that's a start. What you know about that is my first response. And so let that percolate a little bit.
Our next slide sort of goes through some of these points on the player type side. So let's start with the first one, which is goals. And so one of the first conversations that's going to come out of thinking about that audience is a certain tension between what our players want to do and what it is we want to do with that game. And since many games, our goals have to do with maybe making money. That's not foreign to you on your side, right? So the needs of commercial games are somewhat different from the needs of indie games, or what's called serious games, where the goal of the game is actually to educate or to create empathy. Increasingly, there's an assumption that games, the immersive experience of games, can create empathy in players. So the goal, like the goal of our game to create empathy, to educate, or to make money, all the different goals are of course going to create different games. But this is somewhat in tension with what is the player's goal in playing a game. And that's very likely to have more to do with enjoyment, satisfaction, and both extrinsic. Well, I'll wait on the extrinsic versus intrinsic until we talk about motivation. So let's just leave it there with goals, that the player's goal is somewhat different from the game goal.
And I probably could have done this better by addressing what's the corresponding thing to the game goal. I guess it might be the ulterior motive of the website. Why do you even have one besides serving the user? But it's so user-centric that we often start with, for each persona, we develop one or two or three user stories, where as a certain subject position, I want to do something so that, and that's the why, it's really important to get a sense of what kind of stories are we trying to accommodate. And those end up being part of how we organize all the features that we want to build into the website. And an important aspect of this is also, we should be pinning down what the acceptance criteria, what that means is, what is this acceptance criteria? What would it mean for that story to be successfully accommodated, right? And as a package, that's a good place, I think, to start matching up the goals of players and pinning down.
That gives me a thought, David. That gives me a thought. So I knew that these ideas would feed back to each other. Acceptance criteria. So sometimes you can't give the user what they want. I think that does happen in terms of game design. They want a lot of free content. We don't want to give them all that free content, for example, right? So that tension is both what we can give and what we can't give. And we may find ourselves innovating at that point, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, another part of player type, and this I would say has been the obsession of people whose research is on player types. And also, especially in the space of learning, how do you get kids, for example, to engage with content? Can you do it by motivating them differently? But the player types themselves come from MUDs. Any of you old enough to have done any MUDs in the 90s, multi-user dungeons, which were text-based the first multiplayer games were text-based. We didn't have the graphics capacity to do what we can do now. And they realized that people played for different reasons and that their reasons were sometimes in conflict with each other. So there were people who loved to compete and even kill each other in these early MUDs. And some people get joy out of competing, and other people prefer a cooperative atmosphere. Some people are there for social reasons. Other people are there for skills. Other people want the experience, so that their motivations for being there are quite different. And there's a truism that for your game to be successful, you have to provide something for everyone. And I bet that's not completely true in web design, David, is it? Is there something for everyone? Go back.
Sorry, go back. There's everything. But the focus of a particular web app, well, certainly a website, which is usually informational, is going to be a narrower scope of things that they might want to expect to be able to get out of it. But then as you range to social media, then the whole gamut could be there. And there are games that are hosted online. So it's hard to say. In the more mundane level, I mean, some people are looking for information. Some people some sites are oriented to that. Some are oriented to making a transaction, doing something, getting something done, as opposed to finding something out. People may come to the very same place looking for the aesthetics or appreciating it, or they just want to get something done. And some may want to come and be with other folks, and some may want to be there anonymously. And that's just off the top of my head, kinds of parallel things that might, and I'm sure that you could think of more.
Well, so it seems to me what you're saying is users with different motivations would just go to different websites, so that you don't have to, your website doesn't have to be all for all. You
Right.
can just cater to social. So a social media website is just going to cater to the chatters, and something which tolerates trolling, for example, is catering to people whose style is in a game sense, to be a killer, right? They want a griefer. We have this term griefer,
Right.
somebody whose entire enjoyment is destroying the creative products of others, which is a darn good description of a troll on social media, right? And that's their pleasure. That's their player type, in a sense. It's a
Right.
social problem, but it's also a player type.
So this is a little bit distinct from types, because it's sort of drilling down from that into just the motivations, which may be transient for people. I'm sure I didn't do a great job of thinking of all the possibilities here, but maybe I did an okay job of provoking your own thinking about how do we characterize motivations, get a handle on them, and are they distinctly different or just broader in a lot of cases than in games. Preferences.
All right. So another aspect of player type, and in some analysis of player types, are different kinds of preferences. And that's evoked in the last one, but we get more specific here. Some people prefer text, and they like text games or text heavy games. Other people really need visuals. Other people really care a lot about music and soundscapes in their games. Some people want to have limited physicality. Other people want a full immersive VR experience. And for other people, that just makes them nauseated and sick to their stomachs. And then, of course, in this preference thing always is what they're capable even of experiencing. So if I have to say that there was a really wonderful moment. Well, for me, I found it wonderful. I guess you could call it, well, let's just call it wonderful because of the intervention. The Immerse Institute, which is another investment for growth project. Ours, Playful by Design, is an investment for growth project. And another one also funded was the Immerse Institute, which looks at immersive VR, principally technologies for a variety of uses. And they had a 2-day conference. And at the end of the second day, a faculty member from art and design stood up and said, this is so visual centric. He said, are there no immersive experiences available to the blind, right? What people with limited vision and the blind, are they, where are they in this conversation about immersive technologies and new technologies? I thought it was just a really wonderful moment of a reminder to everyone that in our excitement at providing certain sensory experiences, there are people whose preferences don't allow them access. So I'm thinking also of like people on the spectrum who have sensory sensitivities to sensory overload. Do you have ways of shutting off the sound? Do you have ways of stopping the haptic sorts of parts? Can you reduce sort of chaotic communication from other players? Like, what are those options? So having options. Okay, so what do you do? What have you got when you talk about these issues?
Yeah, I tried to think of what would be the parallel thing. And of course, we have to address, we don't just build a website in a vacuum, we build it usually to merge, to be coherent, harmonized with all the other ways that people contact. If it's our business, it might be by phone, might be face-to-face. So we have that kind of range to cover, not so much sensory experiences, but we do have the same, obviously the same accessibility challenges. And that it also entails keeping it consistent in the different modalities. It's actually a lot to keep track of, but I'm not sure it's exactly the same as what you're describing there when we have sensory, but the different kinds of things people might want to aspire to or have in a game. Something to think about.
Okay, design values. So a lot of times, I'll not say a lot of times, we worry that a lot of times people don't think about this until the end, right? So if you're not thinking about the sensitivities of your audience and the needs of your audience and taking a critical look at your content from the beginning, it's really problematic to do it at the end. And games will get criticized for having sort of adding values by sort of tokenizing a character. Let's throw a non-white character in at the end to show that we're diverse. And this is contrasted with a design environment in which all of the values that you want in the game or that are important to your audience are in at the beginning. So this slide sort of shifts us a little bit from a discussion of the player and player types, the user needs, to design practices and processes. So increasingly in game design, we're talking about putting the values at the front, not an afterthought. And I see that you've written same on your side, David. What's the plus?
So the one plus that comes to mind is the perspective that emerges from Eric Meyer or Erica Hall, that really the gist of it is empathic and relational design, keeping in mind that we're people talking to people and basically having, in a profound sense, conversation through all of the interaction that happens on the website, not anonymous. It's not like putting a billboard up on the freeway. And so there's a couple of excellent resources for diving into that a little further. We may come back to some of the points in subsequent slides.
Wait, back up a second, because your slides remind me of something. We could have slipped a slide in here called participatory design, because there's also a move in games. It isn't enough to be inclusive of content. If you're going to include content on a cultural minority or any sort of community, you really ought to have somebody from that community be in the design process, right? Or you're going to make mistakes. And that participatory design is becoming more and more important for games. And I suspect, I know that it's a hot topic in design communities as well. So
there's probably a book apart for just that now. It's a little bit more recent.
Right. Okay, on to the next. What have we got next here? Oh, well, here, this is it. So more broadly, those design values fit into larger contexts of social, historical, political contexts. So you are designing a product in a moment in time And so context could refer to thinking about the devices people have in the environment. So, so what stops the metaverse from happening is that not everybody can afford VR technology, right? Not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Let's start there, right? And so the context of the technologies and the environments means that there's inequalities from the get-go, right? So if you're providing a new game, you have to make sure that that game is accessible. This you've also written basically the same. So
well, those are all, yeah. Any kind of service design, really, you're going to have some of those same basic things. And it occurs to me that there's also an ecosystem around any game as well, because there's all sorts of other ways that you engage in players and games. If it's a big venture, if it's a big for-profit, Grand Theft Auto, you're going to have swag and things to buy and ways to upsell. And so there will be an ecosystem. It's just that I think in the web development area, and which I would take even larger than just specifically web. Again, it's that multiple channels, multiple ways that people will engage, and you need to be cognizant of the whole.
right. I can actually, I teach the graduate seminar in game studies, and one of my students did a really wonderful presentation yesterday on what happened when a really, really popular game released its sequel. And in the sequel, the main character was a lesbian and was unapologetically so. And did not give the player an option to play a different character. You had to play this character. And what happened afterwards, where a lot of toxic reaction to the game emerged. And there is famously, after Gamergate, which was a controversy where there was a sort of a conservative white male backlash against inclusivity in games, made a hostile environment online, and it's still controversial, and I think it's fairly well known within game studies. I don't know whether it is the thing that you talk about in web design, sort of this larger social context to issues of inclusivity and accessibility.
Yeah, probably emerging more than an established tradition.
Okay, down into the weeds of design now. So after you know who your audience is and you've decided sort of in large strokes what it is you're going to be doing, we tend to make worlds. And there are issues in creating that world having to do with how our players are going to navigate those worlds. And one of the ways we talk about these are mental models. And this is, of course, specific to how they're navigating the world, but I'll just leave it there, that we do world building and we have to help our players navigate the worlds that we make.
Yes, and we create spaces, online spaces, so you have to find your way through it. So the analogy is pretty straight there, although it's metaphorical, wayfinding through the website. Being able to find stuff and discover stuff, not just find it. Peter Morville coined the term ambient findability, and it kind of sums all those features up, all part of a larger thing, a larger context of information architecture, I think. Might be coming up in another slide here.
Yeah. Okay. So this runs right into, as we're making our worlds, there is content in the making of our worlds. And one of the ways we talk about it is theme and genre. So a space fighting game is different than sort of a farming game. The games you play on your phone, right? There's a genre, and having the genre and a theme situates the player and shapes their expectation. They have competencies already coming in, they have expectations, and we use those. Right, so we use existing themes and existing competencies, and they kind of know what to expect. We signal those through the genre and through our modalities.
So I think we kind of formalize that to the extent we do anything parallel with a design system which keeps all of the properties and the components and the look and feel and the color palettes and everything coherent, especially across other properties beside the web, which then makes it easier to know even where you are and what's going on. But I don't think there's maybe I'm missing it, but I don't think there's an exact parallel to genre unless
Well, sure there is. Sure there is. How about the difference between a social media site and a informational site? So,
I guess you could, yeah, I guess you could look at there's family resemblances of types of websites, and you could do that, and that would change the expectations. Sure, banking site is obviously going to have a different uh, basic theme, and you kind of have to stay with it. I mean, you can't take the conventions once they get established too far left or right without confusing people. So I suppose that would be, yeah, there's parallels.
okay. So this one is big for us, right? So many games tell stories, but they don't all tell stories. And for some players, and this is a little bit back to player type, some people want narrative engagement with a story, and that's why they're there. But for other people, the narrative is in the way. But why do we use stories in games? Even for games that really are about some physical activity, some action. The narrative provides pace and structure, and also back to expectations. So the narrative allows an expected pace that you know something's going to happen after another thing, after another thing, after another thing. So the existence of a narrative sort of socializes the player to expect a kind of linearity or branching paths. But it allows us to sort of manipulate their experience. Oh, manipulate's bad. Control, shape, sometimes manipulate their experience in various ways. But some people play despite the narrative. Do any of you click through text in a game because you just want to know what you're supposed to do next and you do it? So sometimes you enjoy the story and sometimes you don't.
Okay.
What have you got, David?
Well, we have to, it's increasingly common to think about the user journey through the experience of engaging your website and doing whatever they're trying to do, and to think of it in terms of a narrative arc. And so Donna Lichow drew this little diagram where you've got, kind of a hero's narrative up to a crisis, then the denouement and the final resolution. So it's a way to think about organizing what you build for that journey to be successful, whatever that is. I think it's fun to think about it that way. Useful. Back to information
Okay.
architecture, stepping out a little bit.
Okay, so now we're getting down into the weedy weeds of specificities of design. There are narrative designers who are responsible for the narrative design, and then there's the artists. And the artists are called in, obviously, not only to create assets, but to think about the design side of making the world. So when we were talking about wayfinding earlier and the world building, that was about sort of designing the world, but then you have to make it. You have to make it for people to dwell in. And one of the things that we have to do is, although there's a trend towards realism, I also had a student do a presentation yesterday on the impact of realism in violent games, which was very interesting. But in general, we have to abstract the world. The world is too complex. So we have to abstract it, and we do that with visuals. We do it with reducing the narrative complexity down to simpler storylines and reducing the visuals to something easier. And we do this for many reasons, and just one was listed here: to focus the player attention on what we need them to attend to make their way through the game.
Sure. And I think we just know those things through the rubric of information architecture now. We can talk more about that if I can already think of some other details, but I think basically we do that. Yeah, we do that.
All right. And so the meat of the design of the game really is the interaction between the player and the game world and its mechanics, right? So they have things they can do. And we have different kinds of affordances and ways to talk about these interactive opportunities for the student, that's funny. I'm thinking always about course design, for the players. Actually, we could have a third person here talking about course design. That would be fun. We could have a conversation between course designers, game designers, and web designers. That would be fun. But some interactions in a game are real, meaning the choice I make will change my experience, right? And I choose to kill this person instead of cooperating with them, and the outcome that's possible to me in that game may be different. Sometimes affordances are hidden. There's things you could do, but they're not obvious. You have to hunt for them, or you have to be part of the larger gaming community to know about them, right? So this is why people watch videos of other people playing games, because the affordances are hidden, and that is part of the game. And then false affordances, this is a criticism of games. It looks like something should be interactive, but it's actually not, right? It's a false affordance. It's sitting there, it's a sword, but you can't pick it up. And more deeply, what's going on here is a conversation between the player agency, like our agency as designers, and the player's agency. And they need some freedom, or they'll be frustrated. And they want those choices to be meaningful. So they don't want interactivity, which is false. You're going to end up at the same place no matter what you do. And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to do that. Not everything could be an open world game, right? I mean, some things are more narrative. They're not really game-like. They're more like interactive stories. But if you give them choices, they have a desire for those to be meaningful. And then, I'm sorry, I'm just going to run through all of these, David, and then you can dig into wherever you want. And then there are also indirect things that happen that feel interactive, even though they're not, which is to say they do an act which triggers something unexpected. And there's randomness. I don't know if you saw it. My t-shirt says here, I wore my random encounter t-shirt just for you today, to talk about in games, the power of the unexpected and the random. And I'm really interested to know what that would be in web design. What is unexpected and random? But go at this as you want, David. There's like too much here.
Yeah, I think unexpected and random is something we try to control for, and it's really not a feature. It's usually a bug. And one place where it can crop up is in stress cases, which Eric Meyer, the author of one of those books I showed you earlier. And we're starting to be a thing that people talk about, but just because everything works for a normal person in a normal user testing circumstances doesn't mean it will work when their cognition is compromised by the fact that they have a sick child and a dog that just escaped, and they're trying to get the number of the poison control center or something like that. It's like you have to consider people with diminished capacities for perfectly good reasons. And then the way you wrap that is the way I present it in class, is as empathic design that just start from the point of view of these users and think it through a little bit, and you'll probably indirectly come to a lot of the same critique as for UX.
Okay, so this is for it's true for all games. And some it's more important than in others, which is that the player, while playing, needs access to sort of the knowledge of the world, of what's in the world, of how to play, of what they had. And this gets into issues of the user experience in the interface itself. What are the mechanics you provide to let them gain access? This is sort of not the narrative, but the outside of the narrative part of that experience. What do they know, and how can they manipulate of the game? Oh, thanks for the hint on the time. We just have only a couple. We're going to quickly through these slides, David.
I mentioned information architecture. It's another place where it comes to bear on managing information. We have our ways.
Okay, so a couple of these here have to do really with optimizing the game experience. And so among the things that we want is to keep people addicted to our sites, our games. I'm collapsing these. We want them to come back. We want them to keep playing. We want them to waste their time on our website. And so games of chance. So gambling games, random games, these tap into people's addiction parts of their brains and serotonin. And I'm not saying we're all proud of using this, but game designers do know about this and do use this to keep players on their site.
My only insight here is that I recognize that from Psych 101, B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning, and
And
yeah.
you can game.
It's really not playful, but it is definitely a manipulative, and so I'm not a big fan.
Not all bad. I mean, it's I'm making it sound terrible, but
Right. Well, there can be reasons that it can be used constructively in education to keep kids on task, but I think there might be more
okay, so
ways to do that.
there's another whole area that we sometimes refer to as whimsy, where games also allow for play. And we don't have time to really get into how we use these terms difference, games and play. But whimsy is an aspect which allows the player to creatively engage and bring in personal expression and bring in humor. And this is obviously not available if there's no interaction in the game that allows them to contribute. And when you can't contribute in game, it really happens in gaming communities outside the website. So we have ancillary websites, games do, many, which allow people to investigate this. So humor on websites.
Yeah, and MailChimp famously tried this out and got in trouble right away with their whimsical voice and tone. And so managing voice and tone is much more, I think, you have to be really cautious about injecting humor, because you've got everybody in the world, or anybody in the world, that could be there. You can't really assume the context. If you could figure a way to know exactly what the context is after a little bit of interaction, maybe I can see how that could be a direction to go.
Okay, let's move on quickly through the last couple. Okay, failure. So failure in games is fabulous, and it's part of design. So we design player failure, and we design for it, we manipulate it, and it's a positive good.
Yeah, not so much, I think. But counterintuitively, sometimes if people are bouncing right off their site, it's because they got what they needed right away, which could be a positive thing. But if you count a bounce rate as a negative, you'll miss that possibility. The only thing that came up in terms of failure being otherwise bad.
Okay, so we do play testing. So do you.
Yeah.
I think that's all we need to say there.
I don't think there's much. Yeah.
And then following play testing, these are the things we tweak, and we can also go through these pretty quickly. After play testing, then we want to fix the balance between agency and randomness. If there's more chance, the experience is less predictable. If there's less chance, they can do more strategy. And it seems to be similar.
Yeah, well, I think it's similar, but kind of contrary, in the sense that really chance is not a thing that we try to figure out how to include gracefully. We try to make things predictable. I think the user has a tacit strategy. We don't particularly know it, but we try to match that. It's narrower scope, I think, in this one.
Okay, and again, we control the challenge, how difficult a game is. We want them to get into a flow state, so we want it to be hard enough for them to try to attain skills, to get into this balance. We're trying to create playfulness and engagement. So this is something we tweak a lot after playtesting.
Yeah, I think we're mostly trying to reduce friction all the way through, but we might want to introduce it here and there to prevent, exiting without saving or something like that.
Okay, are we at the end? Well, all right, so let's just leave this one. We're obviously trying to increase engagement, and this goes back to player type at the beginning. So this is just evokes that player type. And this is our last slide here, which is just that I would say that we have lots and lots and lots of similarities in terms of process.
And we have kind of two categories. We have documents and tools that are part of the design process, and then also a whole bunch that are documentation of the finished product. And that's all I have to say about that. Dan Brown is a great communicating design, a great resource if you want to dive into all the documents per se.
Okay, so let's stop our slides there. We can actually, you can stop sharing even, or we can put it back if we need it.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
see
good.
if anything came into the audience, into the chat from the audience, or if anybody
Bunch
would
of
like
chat.
to raise your hand and ask a question or make a reflection from your own practice. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see. Let me just read from the chat to start. And then if you would like to enter this conversation, add it to the end of the chat or put your hand up and let's hear your thoughts. If you have any questions for us, feel free. So Kevin says, it was surprising to me, but also refreshing to hear it said that all websites are games in some sense. It feels very game-like doing development design or other work on all sites. Even a departmental site has a challenge in front of you. You balance, yes, different tactics to make the site useful and relevant. Yes. Design is a game. I love that. You actually have upped the ante here from every website is a game for the user to the design experience is itself has gameful elements. Kevin, do you want to say something about your 20 years of game development? It sounds like, could you elucidate your sense of the game of web development?
Oh, good grief. Now you expect something profound, don't you?
No, it doesn't have to be.
No, no, I just it's just still kind of thrilling, you know, to enter into a new project, a new site, a new thing. And it seems to me very game-like that you're gathering resources, you're using methodologies, you're developing a plan, you're going forward and, you know, trying to win, in quotes, and make a productive site, really no matter what the purpose of the site is. And it was really neat to hear you say that. I just like that.
Well, I have another parallel having to do with playful education, playful pedagogies. When I tell people that I use playful pedagogies in the classroom, they think that what I'm saying is that they play games. And that's not generally what I mean. I have my students make games. So the play is the design. So for me, the real game is in the design. The real satisfaction is in the design. My grandparents were gamblers. Um, they were Slovenian tavern keepers and they went to Vegas every year. And I learned a lot about games and gaming from my grandma. And she said, how to win the game, own the casino. And so the real game of it, the real game that's going on is the game that the casino is playing as well. So anyway, I'm right with you. The game of design is incredibly satisfying. And we can talk about our design practices using our game design techniques. It's self-referential. So we design our design experiences. Thanks, that's awesome. I'm sure other people feel about this as well. Aaron, you agreed. Feels like part of the connection between game design and web design is bringing people back, keeping them engaged. Absolutely. Anybody have any experiences or thinking about trying to engage people, especially as we were talking about using their addictive impulses as, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do people have an opinion about that? Should we manipulate people's serotonin to bring them back? Is that fair? Is that good? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Erin, do you want to
I was just going to say I'm a sucker because from a gaming perspective, a video gaming perspective, that's what brings me back, right? And that's what keeps me engaged and going and continuing. From a personal perspective, I have problems with that, especially when I think about like my own kids and social media and that kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of this, I don't know. It's
an ethical issue.
Yeah.
It comes down to and one wonders whether that ethical conversation is happening often enough in the design process and the value issue, right? What are our values of our company that we want to addict children to our website? Like, do we feel good about that, or is that a little bit ick for us as we're deciding, you know, which methods to use, right, in bringing them back. Thanks also for your comment, Erin, about all the new accessibility options there are. I have to say that game design is leading in this. I heard this from a technology specialist talking about accessibility design from the engineering side. And what they said to me was, in fact, across industries, the game industry is way ahead of other industries in implementing and thinking about even accessibility in the implementation of these sort of shared new technologies. So it's a $1 billion industry, the game industry, and it's getting the message about accessibility and it's leading the way. So that's kind of cool. There were a couple of comments in the chat about university websites, because I'm sure some of you are responsible for them, as are we all, right? All of us probably have had impact on some university website or information sharing. How do we feel about the campus's desire to control the branding and the aesthetics of what we can do? How do we feel about that? Like, I often wonder how those design decisions get made, really. Does anybody know? Are any of you involved with making those decisions?
Well, there's definitely a design system, and a lot of components are ready to go, and templates, and it's encouraged, yeah.
Well, who makes those decisions, David? Do we know who makes those decisions?
It's a marketing probably at the top of the food chain there, because it's branding and consistency in terms of how they look. But Brian might have been talking about university websites in general as a kind of pattern that they all seem to fall into, and that's really intriguing to me. I don't know.
Michelle just tapped her.
Hi. Yeah, so I actually work in marketing and branding. I'm a senior designer working on the brand. So we do a lot of work with the WIG group on campus. I'm not sure if you're familiar. It's the Website Implementation Guidelines group. So we work really hand in hand, and it's really trying to find a solution that is accessible and still within, the colors and things. We create, Brian can probably talk about this a little bit more. We create a system that is kind of plug and play, ready to use for people, but it's not necessarily, we're not saying that's exactly what you have to do. We're just giving you, like, we've already tested this. This has gone through the ringer. We've had the accessibility experts look at it. So yeah, Brian, I don't know if you want to expand, or Courtney.
I can talk a little bit about it. So yeah, we go through, so WIG, the Website Implementation Guidelines Group, has a set design and kind of a general look and feel. And however, each college or each unit inside that college can theoretically hire an outside developer to say, no, we're going to change the shade of orange. And that's discouraged, but that happens. And so there's a lot of tension between kind of that standardization and kind of that being our own thing.
Yeah. We had a slide that we didn't have time to put in, which I think speaks to this, called constraint. And it's part of the topic of all design conversations and games, is that we're constraining all the possibilities. And then you design with those constraints, and it's seen as a kind of creativity. I see you saying we constrain these options, and we don't want you not to be creative. We want you to be accessible, and we want you to be consistent with our branding goals. But please be creative within our constraints. And so that would not be seen as a negative in game design, because when people complain, oh, your game is not X, Y, or Z, and it's like, we know, we've constrained it. And that's this expression, and there's a reason for doing that. So that's actually, thanks for actually bringing up one that we didn't put on the table. So constraints important, right, to meet goals, the goals of the organization, but you're not trying to stifle, as Michelle said, they're not trying to stifle, but you do need to do things related to branding and accessibility in particular, right?
Yeah, and that really comes into play because we are a public institution. We're required to follow accessibility rules. Like that's not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also law. So we're going to do it anyway. So there sometimes when you want, like when you say like, hey, here's a blank slate, let's kind of do whatever we want. It's hard to follow.
The product can be terrible. The product can be terrible when you give people choices, right? I mean, there's good reasons for that constraint, right?
And as Courtney pointed out, one of the other things is that not all the units have the money to hire an outside developer, an outside designer, that sort of thing. So we're trying to kind of allow folks to be able to kind of do things easily.
Michelle, did you want to say something?
Oh, and it's also just trying to make the units that are maybe not have the same tools or money succeed as well. Like we're trying to give them as much and still look and feel and connect to the university in a way that feels like they're getting the support that they need, I suppose.
This is exactly what is happening in the game design world, in which tools are meant for developers to do the hard stuff, like so they can out of the box. In fact, this is maybe not a bad theme to end on, since I know we're at the end of the hour here, is that there's a lot of alarm over AI and specifically AI replacing artists and writers and even programmers, and a negative impact on the industry. But counterintuitively, AI does allow indie developers to be successful because they don't need to hire a huge staff. So having tools that are ready-made for them and having AI be able to handle things means that we may see a more inclusive design community with the success of small indie studios getting big success. So it isn't just like the big, huge studios can be successful. So thank you for bringing up this last constraint and tools, and is a great place to end, I think.
Oh, thank you both so much. We could all give Judith and David a big hand, a virtual round of applause, because that was just wonderful. And like we mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and watch it to pick up on all the rich discussion that we've had over the last hour. So thank you all for joining. I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next month for our next campus workshop. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thanks for coming.